I could be wrong, but there are no Tamil alternatives for double period, or you know, like we don't have a Malayalam alternative for switch, bulb. Yeah.
Last period itself is little alien to the language, right? I mean, like this concept came with the concept of Western schooling that was established there. So then again, uh, that is a, I mean, direct borrowing, of course, but then I would, I mean, personally, I don't think that should be read as a English word. I mean, if you, I mean, I don't know, the difference is uh, in Malayalam, there have been words that have become part of, as you said, the local linguistic activities and discourses. But in Tamil Nadu, in some cases, there have been attempts to create certain words for these things. They will, yeah, coining words for concepts and customs that are not inherent to the culture, but they will make a very conscious effort to do it. But in this case, I'm not really sure, but then I would not read it as, I think.
Also, these terms could also be a result of the larger process of acculturation due to the interaction with the West. Yeah.
It's difficult to tell, but one thing that may give us an insight about it is the way it's pronounced. Like if they're speaking in Tamil, there's a different way of pronouncing it, and if they intend to speak in English, there's a different way of presenting it. What does the first word mean? What does the first word mean? It sounded like the Hindi word kitna.
I think there are also certain words that if you probably say them in Tamil would be considered disrespectful, right? So to say husband is a marker of respect. If you say Purusha, in Tamil, that would be very colloquial. So that is not that's not appropriate to talk to your teacher like that. So maybe that's also playing a role here, even though probably the kid is more comfortable with Tamil, but she has to play the role of the student just to perform. Okay. Right, right. Okay. So the word Purushan does not come. What is the Tamil variant for husband? It is not there. It doesn't exist in Sri Lanka. Okay. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. No, again, that is I think a class nature as well. So if you would probably go into lower class, lower caste families, they would be addressing their husbands as Purushan. It's also a respect to the husband, right? If you call him husband, that's a marker of respect as well.
I think in the general understanding, or when we were looking at the structure of sentences earlier also, when people in common language say that mother tongue, we want to talk in our mother tongue or it's easier to express, I think they're sticking with the grammatical structure here rather than the absolute use of the words in that very language. So in this, they're sticking with the grammatical structure of Hindi, which is very easy to them, which comes naturally, and then words choice and lexicon choice can given, they both are friends, and then they have some, I think, a lot of competency in English again. So these words are understandable. So they're filling in with the lexicon choice is again, it's convenient, whatever flows and whatever fits in, but they're stucking with the grammatical structure of Hindi. So I think that's what they mean, that it's easier to express yourself in mother tongue because you don't have to, because it's not the acquire, it's not the learned language. They didn't have to go to school or in a formal setting to learn this language. So, but again, if we then we know that the code mixing is happening, sometimes even the code switching is happening. So they're mixing the words, but in their understanding, they're still sticking to the mother tongue. And I think that's the contrast that there is. But I think that it's a pretty fair understanding that they're using the mother tongue. One of the points you mentioned was about the use of how do people here interact? What do they consider their mother tongue, or how do interactions happen here? So I was doing this research about English and Hindi reading, but and I was interacting with my participants, a lot of them. So I asked them, "Do you speak English with your friends?" A lot of them remarked that, "Yeah, with my friends from South India, South India." So there's general presumption, and I've also faced that. I speak considerably understandable Hindi. It doesn't give an impression that I'm a South Indian Hindi speaker. So I've also heard that very often that, oh, I didn't know that you're from Karnataka, but you speak very good Hindi. I thought you were from UP or something. So yeah. And they also tend to remark that because of that reason, sometimes they don't feel close enough with their South Indian friends because they're not able to articulate certain expressions. That tends to happen. And the other thing I was wondering is about code mixing in this Indian English. So there is uh, a word that's generally used among World English is called Indian English. But when we look at it deeper, there's more like we have English, Manglish, Kanglish. So we don't know which English they're exactly speaking about. You also mentioned about it, saying it's very local. So when people say they want to speak in English, which English are they talking about? Because if you say Indian English, people are suddenly, oh, yeah, that's what I speak. But that as a term, they may not be very aware about it. But the mention of that term makes a difference in the way they approach English.
So yeah, it was interesting that you said that English is underplanned across all South Asian contexts, right? Yeah, so that English is not really, and we saw that in the education policy and everything. English is everywhere. That policy is even written in English, but they never mention English, which is a funny thing. But so, but then and then English is also not considered mother tongue by most people. So then it raises the question, is mother tongue an artifact of language planning? So the way language planning came, so because English is unplanned. Yeah, English, even though all the policies, all the language policies, everything was written in English, everything was done in English, but what was being planned in English for other languages, that's became mother tongue in a sense. So it's just a question about, is mother tongue, could mother tongue just, I mean, could mother tongue be an artifact of language planning in India?
I think you're
policy measure in India has ever talked about English as an Indian language. Ever. In 2005, the the equivalent of the NEP in 2005 um, uh, was the closest that any government has ever come to foregrounding English. There was a white paper written by the NCERT in 2005 about, quote unquote, the importance of English in Indian society. But that is the closest that any policy measure has come to actually defining what English is with respect to the nation. In other words, English cannot be Indian, other languages must be.
It just seems like it's something very specific.
One very smart student of mine who is Indian in the United States said, oh, it's just like the way that politicians dress, which I thought was an amazing insight, right? A politician will never in India come out in a suit. And in that way, English will never be the garb of the Indian nation.
A funny comparison for this would be that how a lot of us mentioned that in the classrooms, it was good to know some English and it was good to be fluent. But as soon as you started speaking fluent English or only in English, you were labeled snobbish. So I think that is also a cultural representation of how English is seen in this country. It is always the other language. I think, again, policy documentation are just reflecting, as they were very ignorant about the bilingual thing. I think they've been ignorant in acknowledging that how much English has othered us, but also we have othered English in a lot of ways, that we want to retain a sense of identity that is not lost in English. And that's a very subconscious thought that goes on playing, because anytime you see someone in a household that is not English, where English is not spoken as often, somebody's trying to talk a lot in English, and they'd say कि अंग्रेज चले गए इसे छोड़ गए. So which translates to English have left, but they have left this person behind. So there's this very inherent sense of othering that is retained, that gets reflected in the policy document, that is very often seen in the Indian classrooms, because children have learned it from somewhere. And other than in the very elite social groups where it is encouraged or comes as a natural thing, maybe does not come as a natural thing to us. It is, again, all of our parents want us to speak in English, but do not want us to become English. They do not want us to become Britishers. They do not want us to become Europeans in that sense. They want it for the mobility. They want it for success in whatever manner, material or otherwise. But they don't want us to leave our identity behind. That's why there's a lot of clash also. When the cultural elements start getting imbibed in our lifestyle, there's a lot of tussle. So I think it's also about making that demarcation somewhere very visible, that it is the language of the other, even when it's the prestige language.
I'd like to add a relevant experience to it. Growing up, when I was in 8th or 7th standard, I was schooled in a Malayalam medium background, as I mentioned yesterday. But then by 7th or 8th, I started realizing the importance of learning English, having English as the medium of instruction. But we had no other choice but to learn English from external sources, such as books or other source of mediums, social media, or similar sources. So this thing happened with me. So every time I learned something new, I started conversing it with my classmates, people in school. They used to call me "On Vilya Saipa." I mean, you're a big English guy. Are you a white guy or something of that sort? So I was always poked fun at every time I tried speaking English in my school. So this sort of othering was always there, despite English has its privileges.
Actually, I have a question. Whether like when you said that we kind of consider pure English speakers as to be snobbish, does it has to be related to that some sort of a elite status that they acquire in society and how they are unrelated to regional issues or regional how they don't resonate with the regional setup of our country? Does it have to be to do with that elite status, their economic status in society? That's a question.
And then I'll talk about a little bit about othering that she was talking about, like how we have othered English. And when she's talking about when we consider someone speaking English as snobbish. So it's I have found that it is used in like multiple context. Someone and most of it depends on the immediacy of the immediate context that is there. Someone is like if I understand that someone is fooling me around or trying to hide some fact from me while speaking, and if they are speaking in English, then that English spoken is termed as a snobbish or like gives a status of something which is like not uh, uh, which does not other which does other the language, but in other context it is not a plain othering that when we call someone speaking English, we don't other the English as language itself, and we don't find it uh, uh, something which is other to our nation and things like that. This and the other context, it highly depends on the English speaker and the context in which we are speaking, like how what kind of othering will we do of English. So the kind of otherings that we do of English are also immediate contextual based, not like a general plain othering of English being a British colonial imperial language that we do.
Like your emphasis on how the information
Yeah, so I was saying in those particular situations where that othering is happen, especially the bureaucratic context that Adarsh is saying. I think what happens is like it's not about othering the language. It's like the person who is trying to be like not that open with the person who is not able to understand English directly become the iconic representation of that the colonial power that it's like always the bureaucracy in between the normal person and them. And so yeah, I think it is addressing that divide. It's not being transmitted. Information is not being transmitted. It has not like it has. Of course, it has something to do with the language, but mostly it's the fact that that information is just not going through that bureaucratic gap. So in that situation, people say, I have seen it so many times in my village also. It's like Angrez ban raha hai, Bukrat ban raha hai. There are other words for that. So it's basically when it's just the, the transmission is not happening. There people use it.
Other specific contexts, like in the case of Kerala, there were sometime in the colonial period, the Muslim scholars were saying that English is the language of hell. English is the language of hell, so you don't let your children study English. That was a period, like most of the religious scholars they were propagating against English. And nowadays also, if someone from a Muslim background and he is fluent in English or he expresses in English, then that stigma, the others they identify Muslims as someone who is not supposed to be speaking in English, and they will say, your scholars or they was against English or such specific contexts are there in different states.
So I also think that rather than making generalized assumptions, we should be emphasizing the contextual examples, right? In my case, I am speaking English was opposed due to a multitude of reasons, with one being the very valorized idea of Malayalam as a mother tongue. They call it Amma Malayalam. So every attempt I made at speaking English, almost all the time, be it at my playground. I mentioned yesterday that I used to listen to a lot of cricket commentaries and then go to the playground and say all these things. So that was a wonderful show. Was spoke fun at. So I think rather than making very generalized assumption, we should consider contextual examples. Like in this case, it was, I firmly believe, is the idea of very valorized idea of mother tongue, and English as an alien entity invading into the culture and language of the space.
I'll just add to what he said because to say that there has not been othering of this language based on anecdotal evidence is a little reductive because uh, it has not always been about the lack of information whether the communication is happening either, because at the end of the day there was this realization for many of us by the time we were in on 8th or 10th that this language needs to be something kind of acquired, that we need command over this language. But I think what he was trying to say and something that I can also relate to is that there was no platform as such or a peer group where we could practice this. Whenever we tried to speak this or kind to, because of course in the end we were not competing with ourselves, we were competing with people from other classes, other situations, and the command over language was something that we had to do. And there was no space as such because people have, especially in Kerala, have associated the language with something alien. And of course there are multiple like I have been told many times that my certain behaviors are because I learned English, otherwise I would not have done this. So this has been a blame thing for some time. So just wanted to enter that context to it.
Even within Englishes, the vocabulary and the choice of lexicon play a very, very important role. Sir just mentioned about Shashi Tharoor. So when we look at writers like ranging from Shashi Tharoor to popular writers like Chetan Bhagat or Sudha Murthy, they have a very particular image about the kind of audience they are talking. So if you speak very complicated vocabulary, everybody feels unrelated and they're like, oh, they are very high class and they're British and whatnot. But if you speak in very simple words and without an without a foreign accent, you're perceived to be close to your roots. So even the choice of vocabulary plays a big role in saying, oh, this person, even if both of them are speaking English, one is perceived to be snobbish because they have certain foreign elements in their speech. Yeah.
Basically, it's not just the language that's, the person is speaking there. It's more than the language. It's like the gestures, how that person has been brought up and all. Because we are speaking English here, and I think it's a very big issue because most of has, we have that in our repertoire. But when you go to another context, like if you go to a rural area or something, and if you speak just a normal sentence, hey, I am Faraz or something, it has so much than just I am Faraz or my Faraz. There is so much more to that. The way I'm speaking, the way I'm shaking my hand, the way I'm looking at them, the way I'm dressed up and all. So all of that is English, and that's what I'm saying. It's an iconic representation. It's not just the language there; it's everything there. So that's my point.
And in certain contexts, if there is not even a single English word is being uttered, there also the term English props up because of the attitudinal behavior of the person towards that person, or the way of dressing itself sometimes becomes a matter of associating it with English, Angrej, things like this. So the language props up there.
Australia or Canada, I don't know. Like just something with those kind of words being very